The Jimmy Barrett Show continues on KPRC 950.
It is 3:33 now here on AM 950 KPRC. You probably heard that one of the ways to get around the vaccine mandated work is to claim a religious exemption. Virtually everybody allows you to have a religious exemption, but there's something that's kind of changed a little bit with that. In that some of these employers are very zealous about getting you vaccinated, so they are doing a little investigation to see if your religious exemption request is sincere. It used to be if you wanted to claim religious exemption, and by the way, parents used to do that all the time for kids going to school that they didn't want to have vaccinated against certain childhood illnesses. They would claim the religious exemption. And nobody at the school system would ever check it out. But these employers are a little bit different. Joining us to talk about it is attorney Andrew Lieb, lieb@law.com. He practices litigation and regulatory compliance. Welcome to our show, counselor. So what is it about a religious exemption that has these employers? What are they looking at when you claim a religious exemption? Your social media post?
So I think you hit it right on, Jimmy, but I want to start off by saying that it's actually under the law in Title VII, if we're talking about employment law. The law is not called a religious exemption. It's called a sincerely held religious belief, and it's an accommodation. So they're not challenging whether you believe in it. They're challenging whether it's sincerely held, meaning is this baloney that you're trying to escape something, or is it actually a religious dogma?
All right. Well, how do they prove that it's not sincere?
That's a terrific question, to know if something's sincere or not. So a good way to do it would be, for example, if someone's claiming a sincerely held religious belief about a vaccine, maybe they're saying it's about fetal tissue. Isn't that right? Isn't that something that people are saying, that they don't want anything that was developed with fetal tissue? That you've heard that, right, Jimmy?
I have.
All right. So the question becomes, what other medicines are you taking that were developed the same way? And did you know things like aspirin were developed the same way? And maybe you did it before and you didn't know, but now that you know, are you still taking it? Is this really a religious thing about fetal tissue, or is this instead a political statement because you're against a vaccine based on your political tribal beliefs?
Well, personally, I think you should be able to, in a free country, refuse to take a vaccine for whatever your reason is. But all of that aside, I understand exactly what you're saying. But the question becomes, at what point, I mean, are we targeting specific groups of individuals, for example, conservatives? What do my political beliefs have to do with whether I want to take the vaccine or not? Are we making an assumption about the politics of a person who refuses to take the vaccine?
Jimmy, I think you have to unwind what you just said. You started off by saying in a free country, you should be able to choose whether you have a vaccine, right? That's
right.
What you said.
Right.
And that's a belief a lot of people have. And that's a belief that people have had since the early 1900s. But in 1905, the United States Supreme Court, in a famous case called Jacobson was a case that they went all the way to the Supreme Court and said, I don't want to take a vaccine. And the U.S. Supreme Court said, you don't have a fundamental right to not take a vaccine. They actually had criminal penalties in Jacobson, and they said that the state can enforce a vaccine mandate. So I think your real issue is the question of whether it's a right to take a vaccine or not. Now, am I telling you that we should change the law? Maybe, maybe not. But if that is the law, the state has the right to give it, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, as early as 1905.
Okay, who has the right? The state has the right. Well, how does that interact with the employer? The employer is not the state.
It's a great question. It's a great question. How does that interact with the employer? Well, you see, an employer, I see that you're a guy that is a Michigan guy, right? And it hurts me a little because I'm an Indiana University guy, and I like IU. And Indiana University in 2021 said, hey, everyone that's coming to campus needs to get vaccinated. I don't know if you saw that. And people said, that's not okay. And that went to the Seventh Circuit, and they cited to Jacobson. And then it went to Judge Barrett, Judge Barrett, the one that was appointed by Donald Trump. And Judge Barrett refused to overturn the Seventh Circuit, and here's what the Seventh Circuit said. If you don't like what your employer or your school is requiring, pick a different one.
Okay. All right.
So what we're hearing is that the right is not against your occupation. So it's not a statement that says you can't be in an occupation. No one's stopping you from being a radio host or a doctor or a garbage man. What they're saying is you can't choose to work where you want and have your own rules. You have to abide by their rules if you want to work there.
Okay, let's complicate this even further. Let's go back to the state for a second. Here in Texas, as you know, Governor Greg Abbott has basically mandated that you cannot be forced even to wear a mask. So the state is taking a far different position than many national corporations are taking. Now, in the case of most Texas businesses, most of them, as far as I know, are not mandating. The biggest exception would be United Airlines, which just fired 600 employees, and Houston Methodist Hospital, which did the same thing. They gave their employees a deadline. You either get vaccinated by this deadline or you're fired. Now, what's interesting is the governor has not taken on either of these two entities, even though he's taken a position on behalf of the state of Texas that you shouldn't be required to do it.
Yeah, very interesting. And so now you're getting into a different topic completely, whether we're in a states' rights situation or a federal government decision. So is this something that is from the top down, from the federal government, or do we believe in states' rights? So if you remember, I started off by saying it's the power of the state. And maybe Governor Abbott could take a position. And maybe Governor Abbott could say in his state, no one require it. But then the question becomes whether the U.S. Senate or House of Representatives or the president and the executive branch, they say you can require it. If you remember, President Biden, he issued an executive order about health care. And then he also said we're going to have OSHA require companies with 100 and more employees. They didn't do that yet, the OSHA thing, just so we're clear. That's not out there.
Right.
And then we have a question of, and this is an interesting question for the Supreme Court, can the governor of a specific state, like Governor Abbott, can he make the rule? Or is that something that needs to be from the U.S. government, from the executive branch or the legislative branch? Now, that's not a question of vaccinations. That's a question of who has the power over this topic.
It's all very interesting. Yep, the OSHA, as you said, has not acted yet. From what you know of what OSHA is this lawful for OSHA to make this requirement and to go to companies and require them to have if they're over 100 employees, to have all their employees vaccinated? Can OSHA preside over this? Just like we had the CDC presiding over evictions. That didn't seem like that worked real well. Does this come under the purveyance of OSHA?
I love your question, and you're right on. And I was going to actually use the analogy to the CDC. And what you're talking about is what's called an enabling statute. And let me just breaking it out. So the executive branch, whether it's Governor Abbott or President Biden, they can't do anything unless their Congress gives them the power. That's called an enabling statute. The CDC and OSHA are agencies within the executive branch. And your question is there a statute from Congress, the Senate, or the House that says, hey, OSHA, hey, CDC, you have the power? The difference between CDC and OSHA is that it's a real stretch to say that Centers for Disease Control controls evictions. And they used an arcane enabling statute that was never used in that way before. But when it comes to OSHA, OSHA's job is to protect the health of workers, staff, and visitors and the public that goes to jobs. So it would seem right up their alley to be able to say, hey, there's a disease and we want to have a vaccination requirement. Now, am I going to tell you that OSHA is going to be able to have a regulation and that's going to be upheld? I can't make any determination of whether a regulation that hasn't yet even been written. I checked the Federal Register before you and I spoke today, and it's not out there yet. So it's very possible they write poor draftsmanship. But when it comes to the enabling statute, I think OSHA is in a much better position than Centers for Disease Control with respect to a stretch with an eviction moratorium.
Fascinating. This stuff is fascinating to me. It's very, very complex, very, very complicated. I got one more curveball to throw you, Andrew Lieb, and then I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. We have the President of the United States putting this edict out, all employers over 100 employees. That includes, by the way, federal government employees, with the exception of employees of the United States Post Office. How is it that we can make an exemption for post office employees that other employees are not eligible to get?
So I want to start off again when you say, here's a rule with an exemption for 100 or more employees. I need to really get into the nuance of it. I will say to you that the original material I saw, as you said, the post office wasn't included. Then I saw subsequent material that said it was going to be included. That being said, I have to study the nuance in it. But how could you do it? You can do it just like they're having in New York. I don't know if you've seen this lawsuit, and I know for Texas people that's a bad word, New York. But in New York, there's a battle going on. I don't know if you saw this. We have a vaccine mandate in New York City's public schools. And then we also have a vaccine mandate in the healthcare system. And then we also have a vaccine mandate for the court officer system. And one of the arguments they're advancing in the courts right now is that in some of these systems, there's an option that you can wear a mask instead of getting vaccinated. But in other systems, they're not. And they said that's a violation of the Equal Protection Clause, which is, I think, what you're getting across right now. And what's interesting about that argument and what the court said, I'm just telling you what the Second Circuit Court of Appeals has said and what we've seen so far in these arguments, is that, hey, it depends on who we're trying to protect. You see, with children in the school system, it's different because they can't get vaccinated, so they're a more vulnerable population, so allowing a masked exemption is more of a risk overall. Now, I'm not telling you I'm smart enough to be on the Second Circuit, but I'm telling you, as you said, it's nuanced and complicated.
Okay. Andrew Lieb, I can tell you're very good at what you do. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day to talk to me today. I appreciate it.
It was super fun. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. That is Attorney Andrew Lieb in New York. 3:45 now on AM 950 KPRC.